So, final thoughts on Final Fantasy VII. Was it better than I remembered it? I think that really comes down to it, because I have been a long outspoken critic of Final Fantasy VII. I have been the one person who have said it's not nearly as good as people give it credit for. I think a lot of it is nostalgia, and I just do not think it is nearly that good. I will say, I take back some of it. Some of the worst parts that I remembered were not as bad as I remember them being. I still think it's a confusing story that is poorly told. And you know what? The guy who is currently in charge of the remakes agrees with me. He said that the actual original Final Fantasy VII is a terrible place to jump onto the whole Final Fantasy VII storyline. Matilda throwing, like, gas onto the fire with that one. Tactics is still the best? Actually, I'll tell you this much. I do have a friend that would agree with you. Tactics is his favorite one of the series. But the director of the remakes is saying, like, this is not a great, easily understood, easy to follow story. And it's not. To this day, there are still tons and tons of people who get basic plot information wrong. The Sephiroth clones aren't clones. They're just regular people who went underneath a series of treatments that were identical to what they did to Sephiroth. Like, the same procedure was done to them, but they weren't clones. They're more like knockoffs. And that translation, people still don't get that right. Was Sephiroth an ancient? No. Jenova wasn't an ancient. Jenova was an alien that crash landed on the planet 2,000 years ago. And people still don't understand that. Why? Because the story is poorly told, made even worse by a bad American translation. So a lot of people first had their hands on the English translation, ended up getting a bad translation of a poorly told story. The story itself is not terrible. It's poorly told. Beyond that, I will say, the actual gameplay holds up very well. From the materia system offering a great flexible level of customization, to the mini games being a ton of fun, to just being able to kind of explore and do different things, and how the world opens up, the idea of all this. I mean, it's a lot of it either is stuff that had been done well in 2D, in the 2D games, and they just continued it solidly here in the transition to 3D, which I think we've all played enough of the early 3D generation of PlayStation games to know that not everything that worked in 2D translated that well. Where my Bubsy 3D fans at? Yeah, Palm, you should totally play the remakes. Actually, the one that's coming out in February, they said, is a great jumping on point. Like, the first remake is really just kind of there as a transitionary thing to get the fans of the old games to the new games, to the remake trilogy. But if you wanted to just pick up Reunion, Final Fantasy VII Reunion that comes out in February, they said you should be able to start from that one fresh and have no problems for the rest of it. That is the director's statement on it. So I would recommend that one, because the remakes have been doing a much better job of explaining these. Yeah, it's February. Can you believe that? I thought it was next month. I guess it got pushed back at some point. I swore it was December at one point. The first remake is optional unless you're like, if you're familiar with the... If you're familiar with this one that we just played with, the first remake does a lot of work to explain the new timeline, that what has changed to the status quo that will set you up for what's to come. If you've never played Final Fantasy VII before, Reunion is supposed to be a good starting point. You won't be lost because you've never played the old stuff. If you have played the old stuff, Remake is the one that explains like the new status quo that gets you all set up for the rest of the remakes. Well, Palm, if you don't want to wait, I mean, you can pick up the Remake and Intergrade right now, and they'll probably last you for a good 4 months, honestly. First remake is mandatory for the cloud cross-dressing part. Agreed. They did a wonderful job bringing that and modernizing that scene. I actually really, really, really loved what they did with that whole sequence. Not to mention the fact that the whole honeybee thing is now a required part of it. And as we found out in this one, apparently you could just skip the entire honeybee sequence. Honeybee Inn sequence. Accidentally, no less. My biggest problem with the plot of this is what is still, to this day, I think, never fully explained. And is not a matter of translation. I don't think this is a matter of... I think this is just an issue of... There is no satisfactory answer to it, which is the fact is, who is the actual villain? Generally, it's accepted that Sephiroth is the villain, but the entire time he has fallen into the live stream with Jenova, or Jenova's head, technically. And from that point on, I'm not 100% sure that his actions are wholly his own. Capitalism is the main villain. Disc 1, I agree with you there. Past Disc 1, it kind of falls to the wayside. Environmentalism is definitely the good guy, though. Because Jenova's whole goal, as it's been explained in the lore, is it's an alien life form that crashes on a planet, devours everything and sucks away all the life, and then destroys the planet and flings itself off into space to go to another planet. If you've ever played Chrono Trigger, it's Lavos. Pretty much. But if you really think about if that was its intended goal, Sephiroth's actions in the majority of the game make more sense if Jenova is the one pulling the strings, because ultimately it's Jenova's goal that gets met by Sephiroth's plan. Dropping Meteor, destroying the planet. Sephiroth's goal is, I am going to stand here where Meteor drops and I'm going to suck up all the life stream and become God. Which is a fantastic plot line if it made any sense or had any basis in reality. Quite simply, there's nothing that gets established in the course of the game that tells you that Sephiroth's plan would even work. That he can become a god by sucking up the life stream. It's never established that that is a thing that can happen. The only person who ever says that is Sephiroth. So I've always lent on the side that Jenova is the one pulling the strings. Now, Sephiroth might have control over Jenova and the cells and be able to pull all that stuff, but his actions are always very clearly... Like, his goals are just weirdly masked versions of Jenova's goals. Sephiroth is Delulu? I don't know who Delulu is. So maybe? So I think that's part of my problem. Oh, delusional. Yeah, I honestly don't think... I think, quite honestly, he has a mental breakdown, ends up falling into the live stream, merges with Genova. Genova, quite honestly, just convinces him that, hey, this is what will get you what you want. But really, it's Genova that gets what she wants out of the whole thing. Although, in the remake, it's quite clear that Sephiroth may have attained godhood at some point. Hard to say. He seems to be the only one who's aware of the fact that there's multiple timelines going on. But that's for another time. We will get to the remakes eventually. Right now, I want to say the game itself is solid. The game itself is fun. You could play through this game and just ignore all of the plot stuff and have a great time with it. Which is good. The plot is a mess, and that's why the remake is necessary. And I will defend the remake's choices just simply because a lot of it is making a lot more stuff make sense and clear. I'm still not happy about this game's choice to do backstory world tour, where everyone just gets one town that is their backstory town, and then, for the most part, never comes up again. To the point where that extends to the optional characters, where the only reason you ever need to go to Wutai is if you have Yuffie in your party. Like, if you go there, we went there without Yuffie, all that happens is there's a few shops. That's it. You can't get most of the treasures, you can't do all the other stuff. You can't even get the treasures that are in the shops, because people will just be standing in the way without Yuffie there. So she gets her backstory town, everyone gets a backstory town, and then that's the only time their plot ever comes up. And I really don't like that. I don't like the fact that you have this wonderful cast of characters and, like, none of them get any sort of due diligence out of, like, one small section of the game. Except for, like, Cloud and Tifa, who get the most character development whatsoever. And also, I'm just going to throw this in there, just because of the fact that I don't get how people could have played through this entire game with all the dialogue and all the stuff and still not thought that Tifa and Cloud were romantically interested in each other by the end. Like, whether they were there at the beginning, I don't know. By the end, I have no doubt that they spent a night together under the high wind. And that's why Tifa was freaking out that everyone else saw it. Like, all the evidence and implication is there. Like, whether or not there was something between Cloud and Aerith, there may have been, but that was done by the time she died. Like, there's nothing, like, lingering on there. And that's the end of disc 1 of 3. You have 2 other discs where pretty much it's entirely Tifa and Cloud pretty much setting up their relationship with each other. So I don't get where that comes from. Yeah, thank you. Ship it. He moved on. He, you know, it's... I mean, not to mention the fact the entire time he knew Aerith, he was really messed up in the head. Like, don't forget that the fact that he also had, like, Zack's memories bleeding into his own at that time. The only thing you'd ship Aerith with is Sephiroth's sword? That is cruel. I mean, Zack's a good pairing for her, especially when you get to see Zack's personality. It's like, yeah, no, he's a total doofus dork, fun guy. I could totally see Zack and Aerith being happy together. And that's why I'm kind of interested in seeing Crisis Core, which is the next game we're going to be playing. We're going to play the remake of the updated remake version of Crisis Core in January. There is no Zack? Well, someone hasn't finished the remakes yet. The first remake yet. and that's why she died. So now she has Zack. There's a good point. They are reunited in the afterlife. Sort of? So what would I say about Final Fantasy VII in the end? What is my final takeaway on the entire thing? I can see why there's such a nostalgia factor for it. Combine it with the fact that it was on the PlayStation. It had the first big visual upgrade of the entire series. It was... Oh, it felt like peak late 90s. Like, perfectly. And I think really there is a strong attachment to it because a lot of people, it is their very first Final Fantasy. Like, in America, definitely, there was a lot of people who played this one first because for an entire generation, PlayStation was their very first consoles. Second of all, in Europe especially, because this was the first Final Fantasy game they got, period. Like, Final Fantasy 1 through 6 was not released in Europe until way later. So this was their first Final Fantasy they got to experience. So I totally understand the nostalgia factor. But just on a purely critical level, this game's kind of a mess. It's a mess in a way that I can see it being very endearing. I could see it in the same kind of level, and strangely enough came out around the same time as Neon Genesis Evangelion. Like, there's that same feeling of kind of like there's a mess going on here. But it's an intriguing, interesting mess that we just kind of latch onto and kind of want to know more about. And there's plenty of open holes that we can read things into. Like, the plot isn't tight-knit, but that also means, just like Gundam Wing. Gundam Wing, another great example, came out right about the same time. Kind of the same thing. And strangely enough, for about the same people who were growing up on Final Fantasy VII, Gundam Wing may have been their first exposure to Gundam, considering it was the first one to air on television here in the States. Which was fun trying to explain to all those people what the Universal Century was. Because I was in charge of an anime club around that time, and I knew what the rest of the Gundam was about, but not everyone else was. I mean, they were middle schoolers at that time. I just did research. So I can see where there's like this attachment to this game, especially this game. Because it was like that perfect storm of things that all just hit at the same time. I'm not going to tell people that they're wrong or they're bad for liking this one, or this as being their favorite. No, it's completely subjective. You like the ones you like. If that were true, do you know how much crap I've gotten over the years for saying I really love Final Fantasy 13? Like, that's kind of come around as a more popular opinion. I was defending the game when, like, before Lightning Returns even came out. So I get the liking, the controversy. I'm sorry to inform you, Palm, that no, you are wrong. There actually is one wrong Final Fantasy game, and that is the mobile game All the Bravest. No, not Exevius Bravius. All the Bravest. It was essentially a really terrible gacha game, cookie clicker type thing, with a lot of microtransactions, no gameplay, no plot. It was terrible. The other mobile, Exevius Bravius, Mobius, even Record Keeper, better mobile games than All the Bravest. All the Bravest is awful. So that's the one actual answer to what is the worst Final Fantasy game, is All the Bravest. I've seen people even defend Final Fantasy II in different ways. I still hate that one. That's my opinion. I'm not going to say it's the objective worst, because I'm sure there's plenty of people who actually like 2, but man, does that one sit at the bottom of the barrel for me. That makes this one look good, in my opinion. But I am glad, as I said, this is getting a remake, because this is definitely the one where there's so much potential that goes untapped through the course of this game. That an expanded universe of just expanding on the actual game story is worthwhile. And I'm glad for it. I'm glad it's getting that treatment, because it deserves it. It deserves that the whole story be told and fleshed out, and all the characters getting more time to themselves. And Matt Mercer playing a vampire. Which, in case you're not familiar with the English casting of the next game, we are getting Matt Mercer playing Vincent Valentine, and I am here for it. But yeah, where would I put this on the scale of things? I would say for me personally, it's maybe a C- in terms of like a tier listing. Like bottom of the C rack. It's one of those things where I can see it being so much better, and it just, either technology-wise or other limitation-wise, couldn't do what they wanted. And I'm glad they're getting a remake. I would definitely remake the remake would be B+, A-, easily. Because it is taking that time. Oh no, far from fail. Far from fail. I just think that this one didn't have enough. It was too ambitious, if anything. Was Matt Mercer always a voice actor, or did he get famous first for his team? No, he was a voice actor first. Pretty much everybody on the D&D Critical Role show was a voice actor first, except for I think Marisha, who was a stage actress before Critical Role. I think she's done a few voice things, but she's was mostly known for her stage work, I think, at the time. So yeah, I think that's where I would come down on this one. And I'm really kind of because I think this is such it's a weird dichotomy, because at the same time, this game has so much more potential that can be mined and expanded on that I'm looking forward to the remakes. At the same time, I hate the fact that it's the only Final Fantasy game that got like an expanded universe. Because all the expanded universe stuff just tacks more confusion onto the already confusing plot. It doesn't expand on anything that's here, it just adds more confusing things. And it drives me nuts that we got all this other stuff, and it's just like, I know you're trying to make it better, but you're making it worse. And luckily, part of what they said with the remakes is that they're trying to incorporate all of the expanded universe stuff into the core universe, the original game, so they all fit together nicely now. I don't know if it'll be doable, but I'm got my fingers crossed for them. But yeah. Next up is going to be Crisis Core. Crisis Core Reunion on the PS5, because I can't get my hands on the original PSP version whatsoever. And I wouldn't want to play the PSP version, honestly. There's a newer version available. But I do have a new capture card, and I do have a way of hooking up 4K gameplay now, so we will be able to start that up in January. We'll be continuing on with this, and we'll do Crisis Core before moving on to Final Fantasy VIII. The other expanded materials, Dirge of Cerberus, and whatnot, that's a sub goal. Quite honestly, like the effort it would take for me to get a copy, get it hooked up, get it configured, get it all set up, and play through those awful shooter mechanics again. Yeah, 50 subs. I'm sorry. I set that one at the high hard one because that's the one I'm least looking forward to trying to get to work and play through all the way through. It isn't. And we're actually only one sub away from getting our Mystic Quest goal, which would be a fun one. That'd probably be we'd be able to beat Mystic Quest in like a session or two. I'm not too worried about that one. It's just an old Super Nintendo game, pretty easy to get set up. That's why that's the 5 goal one. Essentially, all of the sub goals for adding more Final Fantasy games, are all based mostly on how much of a pain in the butt would it be to set it up and to play through it. So the more subs it requires essentially is the more effort it would require on my part to actually get it done. But I wanted to leave those options on the table. You know, Tactics is on there. A whole bunch of other Final Fantasy games from throughout the offshoots and the side games. No, we're not going to watch Advent Children on stream. That'd be just a nightmare just in general to do, and I will say, just since we're on the topic, since I brought it up, my only real statement I have to say about Advent Children is that it's a very pretty movie to look at. Visually, it is a tour de force of what they were capable of doing at the time. It's impressive that they were able to do it after Square Pictures collapsed under itself after Spirits Within. But man, can you tell that was originally meant to be a 30-minute movie? The original script was for a 30-minute short, and they turned it into a 2-hour movie. And I don't think they really expanded the script too much. It's got 30 minutes worth of plot expanded out to like an hour and a half, 2 hours. And it's noticeable. That's all I'm really going to say about it. I mean, I'm not going to say it's bad or anything. It is what it is. Again, I think it just ends up tacking more confusion onto an already confusing plot with the geostigma thing and all the other stuff. And how Kadaj, which, granted, he is the prettiest of the pretty boys. I will give him that. But how he's just able to, like, instantly transform into a Sephiroth. Like, the whole thing about the clones was the fact that they had, like, Genova cells in them. But now they can just randomly be possessed by the ghost of Sephiroth and turn into Sephiroth with all of his abilities and everything like that? What? No, Kadaj is the Advent Children movie, Mathilde. And, he is one of the 3 primary antagonists in Advent Children. The pretty boy from 15 you're thinking of is Noctis. Because in 15 they all have Latin names for some reason. There's really not much to remember. As I said, it's a 30-minute plot expanded into an hour and a half, 2-hour movie. There's a lot of some neat visual stuff, including some magnificent fight choreography. And some wonderful scenes involving the Turks. Honestly, Advent Children, I will say this. I would rent that movie solely for the scenes with the Turks. Hope is your baby boy? Do you prefer older Hope or younger Hope? Like 13-2 Hope? Or 13 and... well, you like every Hope. That's a dangerous proposition, because in, because I don't know if you can really call Lightning Returns Hope. Again, not to get into spoilers for a game we won't be playing for probably another year or two, at the rate we've been going. And yeah, he is like 13, 14 in the first game, isn't he? Although he looks like 10, 11, 12. He definitely looks younger than he actually is, because I do remember he is in his mid-teens in the first. I'd say he looks about Vanille's age, but again, getting into a spoiler. Oh. But yeah, when we get to 13, we'll have fun with that. Because I like talking about the whole... I think 13's character dynamics is... Again, once again, it's one of the weird comparisons. 13 gets so much crap for being boring characters, when it honestly has probably some of the most interesting, like, relationship dynamics and character dynamics between the party members of any of the Final Fantasy games. Where this game is very bland with most of the characters, and yet this one's treated like every character is Shakespeare by the fan base. Like, really? Sid wanting to go to space and then cursing out and forcing the woman who screwed it up for him to essentially be his maid for life? Like, there's possible romantic, like, tsundere stuff going on there. Totally. But the flat out interpretation, like, on the level, on the surface, is... it very much looks like he just enslaved the woman who cost him his dream, right? And then Kachi, who has, like... I don't even get Kachi's story arc in this game. He wants to protect the people of Midgar because that's his job. And also, he assumingly does that job because he wants to protect the people of Midgar. But then he ends up betraying the party for just random reasons, and then immediately turns around and going, well, nothing to do about it. Guess we're just going to stick with you for now. Huh? Do we have to get Kachi? Unfortunately, he is a required party member. The only two you can skip are Vincent and Yuffie. And we skipped Yuffie. Mostly because she's annoying. Alright. I think that's it for final thoughts. I think I've said my piece. I think I've finally got it all off my chest. I don't think there really is anything else I need to say.